So hello everybody and welcome back to my YouTube channel. This is my response to the verdict at Bristol Crown Court of not guilty to criminal damage for the Colston 4, aka the Weekend Warriors as I call them. And this picture is, here they are on the BBC website celebrating outside the Crown Court. And on the right hand side you can see a cartoon I did of them and people exactly like them. Bristol has more than their fair share of these weekend warriors. Did this cartoon for the website uncancelled.co.uk in March 2020. As you can see from the photograph here, these young people, all white, middle class, quite privileged people, university students and so on. I'm not actually talking here about the merits of their case. There are hundreds of YouTubers out there and press commentators doing exactly that. And you can look at your favourite news outlet to see what they've said about this case. Just enough to say that it was inevitable they were not going to be convicted of criminal damage. It didn't meet the threshold of criminal damage. The statue itself was almost worthless. And I expect the judge just wanted to get them out of their court as quickly as possible. With the backlog of court cases we have got due to the pandemic, this has tied up a year and a half of lawyers' time, court staff, public money. So obviously they wanted to get them out on the streets as quickly as they possibly could. Okay, so in the next picture we're going to see a couple of statues of Edward Colston Jr., because he inherited most of his wealth from his father. And Edward Colston, slave trader, glorified in Bristol. We have street names, schools, pubs, you name it, named after him. Some of you may remember a few years ago the pop group Portishead, who were campaigning to change the name of the Colston Hall, which has now been changed set many years later. The campaign against Edward Colston, or against the cult of Colston, as it's called, goes back at least 100 years. This is nothing to do with the modern BLM protests. And these two statues, I'll just explain what these are about. They're both life-size. One of them is Edward on his plinth in the city centre, as he used to be. And down the bottom of the plinth there you can see some strange fish, which are meant to be dolphins, but I think at the time the sculptor didn't really know what dolphins looked like. The other statue is a life-size alabaster statue of Edward, which is at Colston Boys' School in Stapleton. It is now called, it's now a co-education school. Used to be Colston Boys' School. This statue I actually painted myself when I was working for a firm that renovated statues in the early 90s. And obviously while I was doing that job I had to research Colston. I had to look at the kind of clothes they wore at the time, the colours and so on. And I think that's where I first had my interest in what was really going on with the campaign. So the campaign against the cult of Colston in modern times started in the 1920s with the Reverend Wilkins, who was the Reverend of Westbury-on-Trim in Bristol. He was like a YouTuber today. He stuck his head above the parapet. And he complained about why this man was glorified when hundreds of other philanthropists in Bristol, Quakers and so on, had given the equivalent of millions of pounds in today's money to the city. But they didn't get statues and street named after them and things like that. So he asked that question. He was then vilified. His reputation was trashed in exactly the same way that people who ask awkward questions today get cancelled. The same thing happened to him. And then it was many years, probably until about 30 years ago, before the modern campaign started to try and get all the street names changed and so on. The group countering Colston, who have been running for about 8 years. I know them personally, and a friend of mine was actually texting me from inside the trial So, you know, I do know what's been going on with this trial. Let's go on to the next picture. This verdict gives those of us who are free speech campaigners a dilemma, because we might not want history to be erased, or we might not want statues to be torn down, but there are some statues that we might think are so problematical that they should come down, and certainly the one that I feel that way about is the notorious Eric Gill statue on the front of the BBC. And here it is. This cartoon is Jimmy Savile. This is a cartoon I did to commemorate the 10th year anniversary of his death. So this was October last year. I sent this off to my regular outlet. They would have printed it, but they said to me, does there have to be a child in it? I said, well, actually, this is a depiction of the statue, so yes, the child does have to be in it. And they didn't want to print it. They were just too nervous to print it. So that was my most recent example of being censored as well. And I offered it to a feminist website, 4W, and they did print it as part of an article. So yeah, we've got a problem with this verdict, because we're now kind of on the fence of, do we want statues taken down that we don't particularly approve of, you know, and then how can we condemn these people for taking down a statue they didn't particularly approve of? Just to say a little bit more about Colston, it's called the Cult of Colston because he was glorified by an organisation called the Society of Merchant Venturers, who more or less run Bristol behind the scenes. They go back all the way to the English Civil War and beyond. They were in charge of the port. They basically own the universities. Obviously, they were heavily involved in the transatlantic slave trade. And they more or less made him into a modern saint. They're believed to have kept bits of his body up in the back room in their mansion house up in Clifton. It's all incredibly pagan, and that's why the Reverend from the 1920s was so against it. That's why it's been so surprising that the established Anglican Church, in the form of Bristol Cathedral, has been such an advocate for Colston and has been so happy to hold ceremonies and special services. 2 big stained windows about him in there. So the campaign against Colston has been trying to try and get some of these things altered for at least 8 years. So this is well before the current BLM protests. Nothing to do with BLM. The protest was used as a convenient cover to take the statue down. This was all about paganism, not about BLM. Thanks for listening, and I hope to see you next time when we'll be doing a cartoon workshop about a new commission.